So I've been going through all the teams that have already started their off-season planning, and we started off the four teams that missed the playoffs. For the teams that have been eliminated from the first round, we've already talked about the Guelph Storm and Owen Sound Attack. But now let's take a look at the Flint Firebirds. This is a team that still trying to figure out what direction are they exactly heading, because this last season, it was a roller coaster ride right off the hop. They started the year by firing Ted Dent as head coach just 2 games into the regular season. The team lost those 2 games by a combined score of 19-3. And the way the season started, it was kind of, well, is this going to be a team that's going to be at the bottom of the Western Conference standings looking for that top draft pick, or can they turn it around? Well, they brought in Paul Flesch, and it took a couple of games, but you started to see the team taking shape. They were starting to compete against some of the top teams in the league. They were fighting for the playoff positioning. And at the OHL trade deadline, it got a little confusing because they traded away veteran players like Gavin Hayes to the Sioux Greyhounds, Zachary Giroux to the Sudbury Wolves, and then Braden Kressler to the Ottawa 67. So when you see those moves, you think, okay, they're selling. This is a team that might struggle to make the playoffs, but that's okay. They're looking to next season. They're looking for maybe being in that OHL draft lottery. But no, they then acquired Oliver Peer and Roberto Mancini from the Windsor Spitfires, who were clearly sellers at the OHL trade deadline. So it was just a lot of, I don't want to say confusion, because obviously this team had a direction. They wanted to make the playoffs, but they also wanted to be competitive. They didn't want to just be a pushover in the Ontario Hockey League. And in the second half of the season, that's how things were going. I had my power rankings, and I actually had Flint climbing as high as 9th, just with how competitive they were night in, night out. There was a run there where they were just getting points. I think they got an 8 or a 9 game point streak going on. I was about to do a video talking about how well the Flint Firebirds were doing if they would have hit a 10-game point streak. But, for the Flint Firebirds, this team, they have some good young talent. They brought in some good players from the Greyhounds at the OHL trade deadline as well, but ended up finishing 8th in the Western Conference standings and had to face the London Knights, who are the top team in the Ontario Hockey League. So a quick sweep there from the London Knights, but Flint, they did force an overtime in game number 3. So still the question remains, what direction is this team heading? So let's look at the top scorers from the regular season, the top 10 scorers. Oliver Peer, who they brought over from Windsor, led the team in scoring, 37 goals, 43 assists, 80 points. And since that trade from Windsor, he had 15 goals, 18 assists, 33 points with the Flint Firebirds. So really, Oliver Peer, even if you take away the points that he got with the Windsor Spitfires, he still would have ended up top 10 in scoring at the end of the season for the Flint Firebirds. So well done for Oliver Peer, who is trying to extend his OHL career a little further. Second in scoring, Nolan Dan, 28 goals, 36 assists, 64 points. Nolan Dan, he had such a great run in the second half. There was times where it just seems like he was always going to find the back of the net. You could always count on him to contribute offensively, and that's why he was second in scoring with the Firebirds. Third in scoring, Colson Petrie, 27 goals, 28 assists, good for 55 points. That's why the Anaheim Ducks signed him to that NHL entry-level contract. Simon Slavicek, he was another player that was fun to follow with Flint. He ended the season with 15 goals, 31 assists, good for 46 points, and it seemed as though in overtime, he was Mr. Clutch with this Flint Firebirds team. Tristan Bertucci, he had 10 goals, 34 assists, 44 points on the season. He also signed his NHL entry-level contract with the Dallas Stars. So the players on Flint, they were being noticed and being signed to those contracts. Then you had Nathan Aspinall, 18 goals, 16 assists, 34 points. Caden Petrie, 10 goals, 20 assists, good for 30 points. Connor Clattenburg, a player they picked up from the Sioux Greyhounds in the Gavin Hayes trade, he had 13 goals, 16 assists on the season, good for 29 points. Alex Kostov, another player they got from the Greyhounds, 12 goals, 14 assists, good for 26 points. And rounding out the top 10, Roberto Mancini, the overage defenseman, 5 goals, 20 assists, good for 25 points. He started the year in Saginaw, that was traded to Windsor, and then flipped at the deadline to the Flint Firebirds. So in the end, Mancini getting some playoff action in his final year in the Ontario Hockey League. So the goaltending was another great story for the Firebirds. Nathan Day, he was outstanding at times. He was named goaltender of the week, I believe, 2 or 3 times during the regular season. He had a 3.73 goals against average, 868 save percentage. So Nathan Day, he'll be counted upon going into next season. He could be one of the top goalies in the OHL as early as next season. And then backing him up, rookie goaltender Jacob Brown, 4.19 goals against average and an 853 save percentage. So let's look at the overagers who are graduating this year. Nolan Dan, Oliver Peer, and Roberto Mancini, all three of them key players on the Flint Firebirds this past season. And then you look at the overage candidates. It includes Colson Petrie, who I mentioned signed with Anaheim, so there's a chance he might not return. Then you have Marcus Seminis, he's an import. Simon Slavichek, also an import. Blake Smith, and Marco Stoikov. So with that, the Firebirds, they could be in a position to add an overager or two leading up to next season, because if you don't get Petrie, Seminis, Slavichek back, that just leaves Smith and Stoikov. So then you've got room for maybe one more overager. So I think the Flint Firebirds are in a very interesting position. Also a lot of potential, because if you do move on from the two imports, the import draft, you're going to get some good picks. So Flint in a position to retool relatively quickly with the talent they have on this team. I don't think they're going to contend for a championship next year, but this is a team you might have to watch for in the West Division. The Firebirds, they did select at the draft Cole Zarowski, 6th overall. He was picked up from the Mississauga Rebels, who they're comparing to Colson Petrie. It's kind of interesting how much this Flint Firebirds team loves Colson Petrie, but it makes sense. Petrie was an outstanding player for the Firebirds, and I think he's going to be one that's going to have a great professional hockey league career, and we could see him suiting up for the Anaheim Ducks maybe as early as next season. So Zarkowski looking for a good role model there with Colson Petrie, and he had 19 goals in 34 games last season, which is also not too bad. But looking at this roster going into next season, they do have a lot of potential. I'm wondering if they'll kind of be maybe middle of the pack in the Western Conference. So they'll be a little bit better than what we saw this year, but they're going to have to take probably one more season before they become a contender in the Western Conference. But I do like what the Flint Firebirds are doing here. There was some confusion during the season, but coming out of it, I think if you're a Firebirds fan, you got to be a little happy about where this team's at. But that's how I see it from the booth. Let me know in the comments section down below your thoughts on the Flint Firebirds. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. We'll talk to you again soon.